Nettlecombe was not a grand house, and it had long ago stopped pretending to be one. It sat low in a fold of the Somerset Hills, a square grey manor with ivy gone leggy on its west face, and a walled garden that had been let run to herbs and cabbages, because herbs and cabbages were of more use than roses to a household that counted its candles. In late autumn, the valley filled each morning with a white mist that did not lift until nearly noon, and the rooks quarrelled in the bare elms behind the stable. The whole place had the settled, slightly threadbare dignity of a family that had once been of some consequence, and had come down in the world without quite noticing when. It was into this house, on a raw evening near the end of that autumn, that the trouble came to dinner. Eulalia Lindale was 25, which the county had decided was too old, and she had made her peace with the verdict some years before the county thought to deliver it. She was the only daughter of Mr. Lindale, a gentle, anxious, kindly man who had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. Her mother was long dead. Eulalia had run the house since she was 17, which meant she knew the true state of the accounts, the exact price of coal, and the precise number of days the mutton could be made to last. She was not plain, though the assemblies had agreed she was, because she wore refitted gowns 3 seasons old, and did not simper, and had a way of looking at people as though she could see what they were rather than what they wished to seem. This last quality had cost her more suitors than the gowns ever did. Men do not always care to be seen. She had grey eyes, a level gaze, and a tongue she had learned to keep behind her teeth in most company, because a poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford. Most company, not all. Her father had been in a state of nerves for 3 days over the dinner. A gentleman of consequence was to come, a Mr. Pendraith, connected somehow to the great family whose lands lay 2 counties north, and Mr. Lindale had got it into his head that this Mr. Pendraith might be persuaded to take an interest in a small matter of investment that would, he was sure, restore the family's fortunes at a stroke. Eulalia had heard a great many such certainties over the years, and had learned to meet them with a calm that her father mistook for encouragement. She did not tell him what she thought. She only saw to it that there was a good fire in the dining parlour, and that the last of the decent wine was decanted, and that the mutton was disguised as thoroughly as mutton can be. She was late coming down. A crisis in the kitchen had kept her, the sort of small domestic catastrophe that falls always at the worst hour, and by the time she had smoothed her hair and come into the parlour, the introductions had already been made, and the company was seated. Her father half rose, flustered, and said only, "My daughter," and gestured her to her place, and the guest across the table inclined his head perhaps an inch, and returned at once to whatever he had been not quite saying. So Eulalia sat down beside a man whose name she had not caught, and whose rank she did not know, and took him, quite naturally, for one more of her father's hopeful acquaintances, a well-off gentleman of the sort who occasionally passed through and dined and left promises behind him, like younger than she had expected, perhaps 34, with black hair and a hard, handsome, aristocratic face, and eyes of a strange, clear amber that missed nothing and gave nothing back. He was dressed with a plainness she did not then understand, was the plainness of a man so certain of his consequence that he need not advertise it. And he was, from the first course to the third, quietly and unmistakably contemptuous of everything around him. He was not loud about it. That was what she noticed first. His cruelty, if a coldness so effortless could be called cruelty, left no marks. He answered her father's eager questions in the fewest possible words, with a faint, weary courtesy that was worse than rudeness, because it made every one of Mr. Lindale's hopeful sentences sound foolish the moment it was met. He let a silence follow each of her father's jokes that was exactly one beat too long. He glanced at the room, the good wine, the disguised mutton, the careful fire, with the incurious eye of a man cataloguing how little there was here worth his time. And her father, who was neither stupid nor blind, grew smaller and smaller under it, laughing too quickly, refilling the guest's glass too often, reaching after an approval that was never going to come. Eulalia watched this for the better part of an hour, and something in her, some long-banked thing, began quietly to burn. She knew what the man was doing, because she had seen it done before, in drawing-rooms and at assemblies, by people who had confused their good fortune with their own merit. He had taken her father's measure in the first 5 minutes, found him of no possible use, and decided the rest of the evening was a tax to be paid as cheaply as possible. He did not know, and plainly did not care, that the wine he was letting go warm had been saved for a year, or that the man he was diminishing had spent 3 days in hope, or that hope, in a house like this one, was not a cheap commodity. He thought himself among lesser people, and he was letting them feel it, and he was doing it in her father's own house, at her father's own table, having eaten her father's bread. It was the bread that undid her. Some old instruction of her mother's, some scrap of the catechism, rose in her at the sight of a man taking a family's best, and repaying it with disdain. The guest set down his glass, and said to no one in particular, in a tone of mild fatigue, that he wondered the country did not bore its inhabitants into an early grave, since he could not conceive how a rational creature filled the hours between one dull dinner and the next. Perhaps, said Eulalia, before she had decided to speak at all, by learning not to be dull company at the dinner. The table went perfectly still. Her father made a small sound. The guest turned his head and looked at her fully for the first time all evening, and his amber eyes, which had been half-lidded with boredom, opened a degree. She should have stopped. She knew, even as the blood went to her face, that she should stop. She did not. "You have sat at my father's table for 2 hours," she said, quite steadily, keeping her voice low because a lady does not shout even when she has decided to ruin herself. "And you have eaten his food and drunk his wine, and given him, in exchange, nothing but the trouble of watching you be bored by him. He asks you a question, and you make him sorry he asked it. You find us all very tedious, sir, and perhaps we are. But there is a kind of tedium in a guest who has been shown every kindness a modest house can offer, and cannot trouble himself to be even ordinarily civil in return. Boredom is not a misfortune that happens to you. It is a discourtesy you are doing to us. I only thought you might like to know the difference, since no one, I suspect, has ever told you." The silence that followed had a weight to it. Somewhere in the kitchen a pan was set down. Her father had gone the colour of the tablecloth. The guest did not answer at once, He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind the amber. Something she could not read, and she braced herself for the cold set-down that would come, the pleasant, devastating reply of a man who knew 100 ways to make a woman regret her tongue. It did not come. Instead, the corner of his hard mouth moved very slightly. Not a smile. The near side of one. "No," he said. "No one ever has." And that was all. He turned the conversation, with a deftness that startled her, to a matter her father could actually speak to, the drainage of the low meadow. And for the rest of the dinner, he was, if not warm, then at least present, drawing Mr. Lindale out on the one subject where the poor man had real knowledge, and letting him have, for 20 minutes, the dignity of being listened to. Eulalia sat through it, with her heart going hard, and her mind quite certain she had done something irreparable, and she did not once meet the guest's eyes, and she was glad when the cloth was drawn, and she could escape to the drawing-room and be ashamed in private. She learned who he was an hour later, when the carriage had gone. Her father came to find her, and he was not angry, which was somehow worse. He sat down heavily and looked at her with an expression of such complicated feeling that she rose in alarm. "Papa, what is it? I know I spoke out of turn. I am sorry. I will write to him. I will do anything you—" "Eulalia," her father said, "do you know who that was?" "A Mr. Pendraith, your friend from the north." "That," said her father, "was the Duke of Pendraith, Philip, 6th Duke of Pendraith. Pendraith is the family name, and the title both. He is one of the greatest men in England, and I have been trying for a year to be granted 5 minutes of his attention. And tonight he sat at my table, and my daughter told him he had no manners." Eulalia sat down again rather suddenly. "A duke," she said. "A duke?" She thought of the plain coat that had not been plain at all. She thought of the certainty of the man, the way the room had seemed to arrange itself around him without his lifting a finger, the way her father had reached and reached. She thought of what she had said, word by dreadful word, to one of the greatest men in England at her father's table, when her father's every hope had hung on the evening. She put her face in her hands. "Papa, I have ruined us." But her father, strangely, did not seem to think so. He was quiet a while, turning his empty pipe in his hands. "He asked me your name again at the door," he said. "As he was leaving, he asked me to repeat it, and he said a thing I did not understand. He said, 'Your daughter is the only person who has spoken the truth to me in 11 years, Mr. Lindale. See that you value her.'" Her father looked up. And then he was gone. "I do not know what to make of it, child. I do not know at all." He rode north through the dark for a long way before he let himself think about it. And when he did, it was with a kind of irritation, because the thing would not leave him alone. Philip Pendraith had been spoken to by a great many people in his life. He had been flattered by men who wanted his patronage, and courted by women who wanted his name, praised by his tenants, and deferred to by his equals, and lied to, gently and continuously, by very nearly everyone he had met since the day at 23, when the title had come down on him like a roof. He had learned to hear, underneath the words, to the want beneath them, and the want was always there, and after a while a man stops listening to anything else. He had come to Nettlecombe because a connection of his mother's had asked it as a favour. He had gone chiefly to be somewhere his own household could not reach him, and he had expected a dull evening among hopeful strangers. He had got exactly that. And then a woman in a made-over gown had looked at him across a table of disguised mutton, and told him, without heat and without fear, that he was being unforgivably rude. She had not wanted anything from him. That was the thing his mind kept returning to on the dark road. She had not known who he was. She had believed him a mere gentleman, a man she would very likely never see again. A man who could do nothing for her and nothing to her, and she had told him the truth anyway, because it was true, and because he had wronged her father under her father's own roof, and she could not sit still under it. He had watched the colour come up in her face, and had understood that she was frightened, that she knew she was doing herself harm, and that she had done it regardless. He could not remember the last time anyone had risked anything to tell him a true thing. He was not sure anyone ever had. And there had been the other matter, which he liked even less to examine, which was that she had been right. He had been rude. He had gone into that modest house carrying the great grey weight he had carried for a year, and he had let it make him cold, and he had spent a decent man's hope like loose change, because it was easier than feeling anything. His brother would have been ashamed of him. The thought arrived before he could stop it, and it brought its familiar knife with it, and he rode the rest of the way home in the particular darkness that had been his companion since the previous winter, when Edmund had died. Edmund, his younger brother, 24, all warmth where Philip was all reserve, the one person alive who had loved Philip without wanting a single thing from him. Edmund had taken a fever on a walking tour in the Italian states, a stupid, ordinary fever, the kind that kills the young for no reason at all. By the time the letter reached England, he had been 3 weeks in the ground under a foreign sky. And Philip had not been there. He had not written the last letter he had meant to write. He had let a foolish coldness lie between them over some forgotten quarrel that he could no longer even reconstruct. He had frozen after that. He knew he had. He had felt the ice come down and had not fought it, because feeling nothing was easier than feeling that. 11 years, he had told the man at the door. He had said 11 years, meaning the whole span of his dukedom. But the truth was narrower and worse. It was 1 year. It was Edmund. The woman at the table had reached through a year of ice and found the man underneath, and she had not even been trying. And Philip Pendraith rode home through the dark, not knowing that a door he had believed permanently shut had been left, that evening, a little ajar. He told himself he would forget her. He was a duke, and she was a country nobody with a sharp tongue, and there was an end to it. He did not forget her. Winter came down over the 2 counties, and Eulalia went back to the accounts, and the coal, and the mutton, and did her best to forget the whole mortifying evening. It should have been easy. The Duke was gone, back to whatever great cold life produced men like that, and she would never see him again. And the only lasting harm was the loss of her father's ridiculous investment scheme, which she had never believed in anyway. She had spoken the truth and paid for it, and that was that. Except that her father had begun, that winter, to talk of London. It was an old campaign of his, renewed each year with the hopefulness of a man who never learned. And each year, Eulalia had turned it aside. There was an aunt in town, her mother's sister, Mrs. Verity Cardew, a widow of small fortune and large ambition, who had been trying for years to get Eulalia to town for a season, on the theory that a girl not yet entirely on the shelf might still be disposed of if she were only put in the right rooms. Eulalia loathed the whole idea. She knew precisely what a season meant for a woman of her age and means. It meant standing at the edge of ballrooms in a gown that could not compete, being looked over and passed by, being pitied by the kind and cut by the cruel, and coming home in the spring, having spent money, the household did not have to purchase a fresh season's worth of humiliation. She had refused it for 4 years running. This year, for reasons she did not fully examine, she let herself be persuaded. Perhaps it was that her father's disappointment over the Duke had aged him. Perhaps it was that she was 25 and could feel the door of her own life beginning, quietly, to close, and had thought that she might at least look through it once before it shut. Whatever the reason, when the aunt's letter came in the new part of the winter, pressing the old scheme, Eulalia surprised everyone, herself most of all, by agreeing to go. She did not know that the Duke of Pendraith would be in London that season. She would not have gone if she had. And she certainly did not know about Lady Sidonia Marle. Some years before, that lady had decided that she would be the next Duchess of Pendraith, and had been waiting with the patience of the truly determined for the Duke to come out of the strange cold grief that had taken him the year before. The season now beginning was the one in which she meant, at last, to close her hand. London, in the wet end of winter, was exactly as grim as Eulalia had expected, and her aunt's house, in a narrow street off a fashionable square, was exactly as full of contrivance. Mrs. Cardew was not unkind, but she was relentless. She surveyed her niece on the first evening, the way a general surveys poor ground he must nonetheless take, and set about at once with modistes and vouchers, and a list of eligible gentlemen, ranked, with a frankness that made Eulalia laugh aloud, by income and infirmity. Eulalia submitted to the gowns, because there was no help for it. She submitted to being paraded, because she had come to be paraded. But she kept her own counsel, and her own dry gaze, and she watched the whole glittering machinery of the marriage market turn with the detached interest of a woman who did not believe it would ever grind out anything for her, and was not sure she wanted it to. She saw him again at the Harkness ball 3 weeks into the season. She did not see him arrive. She felt the room change, the way a field changes when a cloud crosses the sun. A ripple of turned heads and lowered voices and quickened fans, and she looked where everyone was looking. And there he was, the Duke of Pendraith, in black, taller than she remembered, and colder, with the amber eyes moving over the assembled company, with the same incurious weariness she remembered from her father's table. For one instant she felt only the old mortification, hot and total, and she turned to flee behind a pillar like a girl. She was too slow. His gaze, travelling the room, stopped on her. She saw him go still. She saw the boredom drop from his face all at once, replaced by something sharper and much more disconcerting, and she understood with a sinking heart that he had recognized her, and that whatever was going to happen now, she could not prevent. What happened was that the Duke of Pendraith crossed the entire length of the Harkness ballroom, in full view of everyone who mattered in London, and stopped in front of a nobody in a made-over gown, and bowed to her as though she were a person of consequence. "Miss Lindale," he said. The room, which had been pretending not to watch, gave up all pretense. "Your Grace," Eulalia managed, and curtsied, and could think of absolutely nothing else to say, because every civil phrase had deserted her, and the only true thing in her head was that she was sorry and mortified, and would like to sink through the floor, and she had learned already where saying the true thing to this man led. "You are surprised to see me," he said. "I am surprised you would wish to be seen speaking to me. After you told me I had no manners." The near smile again, that unfinished thing at the corner of his mouth. "As it happens, Miss Lindale, that is precisely why I wish to be seen speaking to you. May I have this dance? I find I would rather talk to you than to anyone else in this room. And I have discovered, in the months since your father's dinner, that this is a sensation so novel I am disinclined to waste it." She danced with him. She could hardly refuse, with half of London watching, and in any case she found she did not want to refuse, which alarmed her more than the watching did. He danced well and said little, and what little he said was dry and honest, and entirely without the flattery she had braced for. And by the end of it, she had forgotten to be mortified, and had begun, against every instinct of self-preservation, to enjoy herself. She did not see Lady Sidonia Marle, at the edge of the room, watching the Duke of Pendraith dance with an unknown girl in an old gown, and doing sums. "We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel." He called on her aunt's house 2 days later. He called again the week after. He took no trouble to disguise it, and London, which lives on such things, went to work at once. By the middle of the season, the strangest rumour in years was running through the drawing-rooms. The cold Duke of Pendraith, who had turned away the loveliest and best dowered women in England for a decade, was paying court to a penniless country spinster of 25, and the girl, if the story could be believed, had once told him to his face that he was ill-bred. Some found it charming. Most found it incomprehensible. One found it intolerable. Eulalia understood none of it. She only knew that the man who came to her aunt's shabby drawing-room was not the man from the dinner, or was that man with the ice gone out of him. He talked to her as though her opinions were worth having, and asked her questions no one had asked her in her life, and listened to the answers. She remembered one afternoon in particular. Her aunt, scenting a triumph beyond her wildest arithmetic, had contrived to be called from the room on a transparent pretext, leaving them alone with the door correctly ajar, and Eulalia had braced herself for whatever a duke did with an unchaperoned girl. He had done nothing of the kind. He had picked up the book lying open on the table beside her, a volume of sermons she had been reading not from piety, but because it was the only book in the house she had not read twice, and he had asked her, with what seemed like real curiosity, what she thought of it. And she had told him. She had told him it was pompous and self-satisfied, and that its author had plainly never in his life been poor or frightened or hungry, and that a man who had never wanted for anything had no business instructing those who wanted for everything on the virtue of contentment. She had said it before she remembered to whom she was speaking, and then she had stopped, appalled, because he was a man who had never wanted for anything either, and she had as good as called him a fool to his face for the second time. He had not been offended. He had set the book down and looked at her with those amber eyes gone thoughtful, and he had said, "You are right. I have read that book 12 times and admired it, and you have shown me in a sentence why it is worthless, and I shall never be able to admire it again. You have a genius, Miss Lindale, for spoiling a man's comfortable opinions." And then, after a moment, quieter, "It is the most valuable quality I have ever encountered, and I have encountered a great deal that the world calls valuable. Do you know that you are the only person who argues with me? Everyone else has agreed with me for 11 years. It is like living in a house full of mirrors. One begins to think one has vanished." She had not known what to say to that, so she had said the truth, which was that she thought it must be a very lonely way to live, and he had looked at her for a long moment and had not answered, and she had understood that she had touched something and had let it alone. She knew that she looked forward to his coming in a way that frightened her, because she was not a fool, and she knew what could and could not be, and a duke did not marry a Lindale of Nettlecombe. She told herself this daily. She told herself he was amusing himself, that great men have their whims, that she would be wise to guard her heart against a thing that could only end in her being hurt. She was still telling herself this when he asked her to marry him, and knocked every prepared defense out of her head at a stroke, because he did not ask the way she had feared and half hoped. He asked the way she had never imagined. They were walking in the aunt's narrow garden. He stopped by the bare wall and said, without preamble, in the plain voice he used for true things, "Miss Lindale, I am going to say something to you, and I am going to say it badly, and I ask you to hear me to the end before you answer." "I generally hear people to the end," she said. "It is one of my few virtues." "It is your chief one." He was not smiling now. "I am going to make you an offer, and it is not the offer a woman hopes for, and I will not insult you by dressing it as one. Hear the truth of it, because you above all people are owed the truth. I am hunted, Miss Lindale. I have been hunted since I was 23. Every unmarried woman in England with an ambitious mother has been aimed at me like a gun for 11 years, and one of them in particular has decided the matter is settled, and waits only for me to agree, and I am tired to the bone of it. My own mother presses me monthly. I cannot attend a dinner without being inventoried as a prospect. I wanted to stop, and there is only one thing on earth that stops it, which is a wife." Eulalia stood very still. "And you," he went on, "are hunted too, in your own way. Do not tell me you are not. I have watched your aunt drive you through this season like a beast to market. I have watched you stand at the edge of rooms and be looked over and passed by, and I have watched you bear it with more dignity than the people doing the looking will manage in their whole lives. You do not want this any more than I do. You would rather be at home, running your father's house and speaking your mind, and being let alone. Neither of us wants what the world is trying to force on us, so I am proposing that we refuse it together." "You are proposing," Eulalia said slowly, "a marriage of convenience." "I am proposing exactly that, and I will not pretend it is more. Marry me, and the hunt ends for both of us." Your father need never worry for you again. Your aunt is silenced. My mother is silenced. Lady Sidonia and the whole marching army of them are silenced. You would have a great house to run, which you would run better than any woman I know, and your own rooms and your own income and your own freedom, and no man ever looking through you again, because a duchess is looked at, Miss Lindale, whatever else she is. I offer you respect and honesty, and my word that I will never lie to you, and I ask in return only that you stand beside me, and let us both be left in peace. I am not offering you love. I do not think I have any left to offer. I froze some time ago, and I have not thawed, whatever you may think you did at your father's table. But I would rather be frozen beside a woman who tells me the truth than warm beside a woman who tells me what I wish to hear. That is the whole of it. That is my offer. Now you may speak. It was, Eulalia thought afterward, the strangest proposal any woman can ever have received, and the most honest, and she answered it honestly, because he had asked her to. You are right that I do not want the market, she said. You are right that I would rather be let alone. But you are wrong about one thing, Your Grace, and I will tell you what it is, since you value my telling you things. You say you have no love left to offer. I do not believe you. A man with no love left does not ask a woman to marry him, because he cannot bear to see her looked through. He does not remember a stranger's name for months. He does not cross a ballroom in front of all London to bow to a nobody who insulted him. Those are not the acts of a frozen man. They are the acts of a man who has frozen himself on purpose because something hurt him past bearing, and who does not yet know the ice is already cracking. I do not know what hurt you. You need not tell me. But do not tell me you cannot love, because I do not think it is true, and I will not begin a marriage, even a convenient one, on a thing that is not true. He looked at her for a long time in the grey garden light. When he spoke, his voice had changed. My brother died last winter, he said. Edmund, I was not there. I let a coldness stand between us over nothing. And then he was gone, and I never mended it. And I have not been able to feel anything since without feeling that. I have told no one that. I do not know why I have told you. Because I did not ask, Eulalia said gently. People tell me things because I do not ask. It is my other virtue. And something happened in his hard face then. Some small, terrible loosening. For just a moment, the Duke of Pendraith was not a duke at all, but only a man who had lost his brother and had been carrying it alone. Eulalia saw it. She did not look away, and she did not fill the silence with comfort he had not asked for. She only stood with him in it. That was all. It was the thing no one else had done for him, and he did not have a word for it, but he felt it, and it decided him about her far more surely than any answer to his proposal could have done. Then let me say it plainly, he said, recovering. Will you marry me, Miss Lindale, on the terms I have named, and on one more that I add now, which is that neither of us shall lie to the other for as long as we both live, however much it costs? She should have said no. It was madness. It was a bargain struck between two people who had agreed not to love each other, which is the least promising foundation a marriage can have. But she thought of Nettlecombe and her father's tired, hopeful face, and she thought of the years of standing at the edges of rooms, and she thought most of all of a man who wanted her precisely because she would tell him the truth, which was the one thing about herself. The world had always counted a fault. No one had ever wanted that. She had thought no one ever would. "Yes," she said. "On those terms." "Yes." The marriage was the sensation of the season, and it was celebrated at High Hall in the early summer. Eulalia went from a made-over gown in a narrow drawing-room to the mistress of one of the great houses of England in the space of a single spring. She managed the transformation with a composure that surprised everyone who had wagered against her. It came from the simple fact that she had never confused the house with herself. High Hall did not overawe her. It was only a very large version of a problem she had been solving since she was 17, which was how to run a household well on the resources it had. And High Hall had resources without end, and she found the work suited her. The great house had received her on that first day with the same veiled contempt its master had once shown her father. The upper servants had lined the hall to meet the new Duchess, and she had felt their judgment come down on her like a change in the weather. The country nobody in her borrowed grandeur, and she had known that they were waiting to find her, wanting exactly as the county assemblies had waited. She had walked the line of them slowly, and then, instead of the little gracious speech they expected, she had stopped before a young under-housemaid. The girl was swaying on her feet, grey-faced, plainly ill, and plainly terrified of being seen to be ill on such a day. Eulalia had said, quietly, that she was to go and lie down at once and have some broth sent up, and that no one was to dock her wages for it. The housekeeper had begun to protest. Eulalia had looked at her, the level grey look, and said that a house was known by how it used the people who could do nothing for it, and that she would have this one used kindly, or know the reason. And the girl had been sent to bed, and the hall had gone very quiet. Something in the ranked servants had shifted. They had come expecting either a tyrant or a fool, and had got instead a woman who had noticed, before anything else in her vast new domain, a sick child at the end of a row. By nightfall, the story was through the whole of High Hall. The house did not go over to her all at once, but it began, that day, to be hers. She found, too, that she was not unhappy, which she had not expected. Philip was as good as his word. He gave her respect and honesty, and her own domain, and he asked nothing of her that had not been named. And if the marriage was a bargain, it was at least a bargain, honestly kept on both sides. They took their meals together, at first at the enormous formal table that had seated Pendraith Dukes for 200 years, the two of them marooned at opposite ends of an acre of mahogany. Then one evening, Eulalia had the footman lay both places at the same end, close enough to speak across, and looked at her husband with a steadiness that dared him to object. He did not object. He looked at the shortened distance between their two chairs for a moment, with an expression she could not read, and then he sat down beside her. After that they always dined so, and neither of them ever spoke of it, and it was one of the small unspoken treaties by which the thing between them slowly grew. For it did grow. Neither of them had planned it, and neither of them named it. But it grew all the same, in the long ordinary evenings, in the shared work of the estate, in the way she told him the truth about his tenants and his accounts and himself, and the way he came, by degrees, to rely on her telling. He had not meant to consult her about the estate. It had begun almost by accident, on a wet week when he was wrestling with the question of a mill he was minded to build on the river, and she had asked, over the shortened dinner table, what would become of the 4 families whose water meadow the mill would flood. He had not thought of the 4 families. His agent had not thought of them either, or had thought of them, and not troubled to mention them. Eulalia had laid the whole matter out in 3 plain sentences: the gain, the cost, and the 4 families who would pay the cost while he took the gain. He had sat back and looked at her, and felt something he had not felt in years. It was the sensation of being shown a thing he had been too high up to see. He did not build the mill. He built a smaller one, further down, where it flooded no one. And after that, he brought her the difficult questions as a matter of course. It was not because a duchess was owed a voice, but because hers was the one voice in his whole establishment that told him what he did not wish to hear, and he had discovered that he could no longer do without it. He thought about that, riding the boundaries of his land one grey morning near the turn of the summer. He had married her to be left in peace, he reminded himself. That had been the bargain. And yet here he was, arranging the hours of his day around the chance of her company, saving up the day's absurdities to tell her because no one else would find them absurd in quite the way she would. And the great grey weight he had carried since the winter was, for whole hours at a time, simply gone. He did not know when it had gone. He only knew that he woke now without the first thought being Edmund, and that he had begun once or twice to laugh. The house he had come back to as a dead man was full these days of a living woman's voice telling him plainly that he was wrong about things, and he would sooner cut off his hand than go back to the silence. He had told her he had no love left to give. He had believed it. He rode home that morning, no longer sure it had ever been true, and the not being sure frightened him more than the grief ever had, because grief he understood. And this he did not. Not all of it was grief. She would have been sorry, later, to give the impression that those first months at High Hall were only a long, careful tending of a wounded man, because they were not. There were ordinary evenings, and some of them were happy. There was a library the length of a barn, and on winter nights they fell into the habit of sitting in it together. She had the accounts or a book. He had whatever a duke does of an evening. The 2 of them at either end of a great sofa, with a fire between them and the wind at the tall windows. She made him laugh for the first time on such a night. She had been reading aloud to herself, half under her breath, from a novel her aunt had pressed on her, a fashionable romance of the most breathless kind, in which a pale heroine swooned through 3 volumes into the arms of a brooding lord. Eulalia had begun to supply the story with a commentary of her own. Dry asides on the improbability of a woman fainting so often without doing herself an injury, on the brooding lord's evident need of a good dinner and an early night. She had forgotten Philip was listening, until she heard him make a sound she had never heard him make before. She looked up. He was laughing. Not the near smile, the unfinished thing at the corner of his mouth, but a real laugh, helpless and surprised, as though it had got out before he could stop it. He looked almost alarmed by it himself. "Do that again," he said, when he had recovered. "Read me the next part. I have not laughed in longer than I can tell you, and I find I have missed it." and I did not know I had. So she read him the next part, and improved it as she went, and he laughed again, and something in the long, cold library warmed by more than the fire. She did not think of it as a victory. She did not think of it at all then. But she remembered afterward that it was the night she stopped guarding her heart against him, because a woman cannot go on protecting herself from a man she has heard laugh like that at her own foolish jokes on a winter night in a house they were both learning to call home. She saw the grief itself only once in those early months, and she never forgot it. She had gone looking for him on a still evening, and found him in a part of the house she had not entered, a small room kept shut, and she had opened the door before she understood what it was. It was a boy's room, Edmund's, kept exactly as its owner had left it, the books, the fishing rods, a coat on a hook, a boy's whole abandoned life held in a stopped moment. And Philip was standing in the middle of it, in the last of the light, not weeping, only standing, the way a man stands at a grave. She should perhaps have withdrawn. She did not. She came in quietly and stood beside him, and looked at the coat on the hook, and said nothing at all. There was nothing to say that would not have been a lie or an insult. The only true thing she had to offer was to be there, and let him not be alone in it. They stood a long time. At last he said in a low voice, "I keep meaning to have it cleared. I have not been able to." And she said, "Then do not clear it. There is no law that says you must. Keep it as long as you need it, and clear it when you are ready. And if you are never ready, then never clear it. And let no one tell you that grief keeps a calendar." And he had turned and looked at her as though she had said something extraordinary. And perhaps she had. After a moment he had taken her hand, there in his dead brother's room, the first time he had ever reached for her of his own accord. She had let him hold it. That was all, and it was a great deal. His mother saw it before either of them did. The Dowager Duchess of Pendraith was a small, sharp, formidable woman named Lavinia, who had been prepared to disapprove of her son's mad marriage with all the considerable force at her command, and who had arrived at High Hall in the first week fully armed to despise the country nobody her son had inexplicably chosen. She had lasted, by her own later account, about a day and a half. Eulalia had neither cringed before her nor flattered her, which no one else in 30 years had failed to do. She had met her plainly and treated her kindly. On the second morning, she had told her that the blue rooms she had been given faced north and were cold, and that she should have the south rooms instead, which were warmer and had the better view. And she had moved her without fuss into comfort. It was such a small thing. The old woman, who had spent 30 years being deferred to and never once being cared for, found herself unexpectedly moved, and by the end of the week she had gone over entirely and become the fiercest partisan the new Duchess had. "He is not frozen with you," the Dowager said to Eulalia one afternoon, watching her son ride in from the home farm. "You may not see it, living inside it. I see it. He came back to me last winter, a dead man, my dear, after Edmund. I had given him up. And now there is a living man riding up my drive, and I know very well whose doing it is, whatever the pair of you tell yourselves about your convenient arrangement." She fixed Eulalia with her sharp old eyes. "Do not mistake me for a sentimental woman. I am not. But I have buried one son this year, and I do not intend to watch the other freeze back to death for want of being told plainly that he is loved. You will tell him. When it is time, you are the only person he will believe. Eulalia did not answer that. She was not ready to. But she carried it about with her afterward like a stone in her pocket, and she took it out and looked at it more often than she meant to. The trouble, when it came from London, and it wore a beautiful face. Lady Sidonia Marle did not accept defeat. She had spent years arranging herself for the position of Duchess of Pendraith, had built her whole sense of her own worth on the certainty of it, and she was not a woman who could simply set down a thing she had carried so long. When she learned that the Duke had married a nobody, a country spinster with a sharp tongue and no fortune, she felt it not as a disappointment but as a theft. And she set about, with the patience and precision she had once meant to spend on winning him, to unmake the marriage that had cheated her. She began with words, because words were her weapon. She could not attack the Duke, so she attacked the Duchess. And she did it in the pleasant, smiling, bloodless way of her kind, so that no single thing she said could ever be held against her. She let it be known in the right drawing-rooms that the whole affair was a great joke, that the Duke had married the girl on a whim and already regretted it, that a woman who had famously insulted him at a country dinner had trapped him into the match by the very novelty of her rudeness. She wondered aloud, sweetly, how long a great man could be amused by an ill-bred country manner before it began to grate. She made of Eulalia's honesty, which was her one distinction, a thing to be laughed at, a rustic crudeness, a lack of the polish a duchess required. And because she was clever, and because society is always glad of a victim, the poison spread. It reached High Hall in the way such things always reach the person they concern last. Eulalia began to notice a coolness in the county families who called a certain veiled amusement, a way people had of watching her at the dinner table, as though waiting to be entertained by a solecism. She understood it fully one afternoon, when two of the great ladies of the neighbourhood called together, ostensibly to pay their respects, and sat in her drawing-room, drinking her tea, and doing, with exquisite politeness, precisely the work Lady Sidonia had sent them to do. They admired everything a shade too much. They asked, with wide, sympathetic eyes, whether the Duchess did not find the management of so great a house a terrible burden, coming as she did from a smaller way of living, and whether she would not prefer to leave such things to the housekeeper who understood them. They mentioned, in passing, how very droll the story of the dinner had become in town, how everyone was repeating it, and they laughed, kindly, inviting her to laugh with them at herself, at the country girl who had scolded a duke over the mutton. And Eulalia, pouring the tea, understood that she was being invited to a choice. She could laugh along and be their pet, the amusing rustic who knew her place, or she could take offence and be their proof, the vulgar creature who could not take a joke. Both roads led where they wished her to go. She took neither. She set down the pot and said pleasantly that the story was quite true. She had indeed told the gentleman he was ill-mannered, because he had been. And she had found since her marriage that her husband valued plain speaking above almost anything, which she supposed was why he had married a woman who could do it rather than one who could not. And she smiled, and asked whether they would take more tea. The two great ladies, who had come to draw blood, found they had somehow been answered without being given anything to carry back. They went away a little baffled, and reported to Lady Sidonia that the country duchess was harder to break than they had been led to believe. But the calls left their mark all the same. Eulalia sat alone after they had gone, and felt the old cold feeling from the edges of 100 ballrooms, the sense of being surrounded by smiling people who were waiting for her to fall. And she understood that the campaign against her was real and patient, and would not stop, and that sooner or later it would find its ground. She began to hear her own famous story come back to her, bent out of shape, told now as a tale not of honesty, but of vulgarity. And in the late summer, when the Duke gave a great ball at High Hall, the first he had given since his brother died, Lady Sidonia came, invited by right of old connection, and brought her campaign into the house itself. The ball was to be Eulalia's presentation as Duchess to the whole of the county and half of London, and Lady Sidonia had chosen it, with a strategist's eye, as the ground on which to destroy her. Eulalia dressed for it that evening with a heavy heart. She had learned, by then, the full shape of what was being said about her, and she had learned who was saying it, and she knew that the ball was a trap, and that a great many people would be there, chiefly in the hope of seeing the country duchess disgrace herself. She looked at herself in the glass, in the first truly fine gown she had ever owned, and she felt the old feeling from the edges of 100 ballrooms, the certainty of being found wanting. And for a moment, her courage failed her. Philip found her there. He had come to fetch her down, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. And then he crossed the room and stood behind her, and their eyes met in the glass. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. He had come to know her too well for questions. "They are all coming to watch me fall," she said. "Sidonia has seen to it. I know what is being said, Philip, that you regret me, that I am a rustic joke you tired of, that I trapped you." She had not meant to say his name. It had come out on its own, the first time she had ever used it, and she heard it land in the quiet room, and did not take it back. "I do not know how to fight her. She fights with smiles and whispers, and those are not weapons I have. If I answer her cruelty with cruelty, I become the vulgar creature she says I am. And if I say nothing, they will think it true. I do not know what to do." He was quiet a moment. Then he turned her gently by the shoulders to face him, away from the glass. "You called me Philip," he said. "I did. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. I have been waiting the better part of a year to hear it." And there was the near smile again, but fuller now, nearer to a whole thing than she had ever seen it. "Eulalia, listen to me, because I am about to tell you something true, and we do not lie to each other. You ask how to fight a woman who fights with smiles and whispers. You do not fight her at all. You have never once in your life won anything by being other than exactly what you are, and you will not begin tonight. She wants you to answer her in her own coin, so that she can prove you are what she says. Do not give it to her. Go down those stairs and be the woman who told a duke he had no manners at her father's table. Be honest and be kind, and be entirely without fear, and let every soul in that room see the difference between a woman who says true things and a woman who says pretty ones. That is a contest you cannot lose, because you have been having it your whole life, and it is the only reason I am standing here at all." She looked at him. "You told me once," she said slowly, "that you had no love left to offer. I did tell you that. Was it true?" The Duke of Pendrith looked at his wife for a long moment in the candlelight on the evening of the ball that was meant to destroy her, and he did the thing he had promised he would always do, which was not to lie to her. "No," he said. "It was not true. It has not been true for some time. I think it stopped being true at your father's table, though I did not know it then. I have been frozen a long while, Eulalia, and I told myself I liked it, because a frozen man cannot be hurt, and I had been hurt past bearing, and did not mean to be again. And then a woman in an old gown told me the truth across a table of bad mutton. She would not be afraid of me, and would not want anything from me, and the ice I had been so careful of began to go. I have been thawing ever since, against my own will, and it is the best thing that has happened to me in 11 years. I did not marry you to be left in peace. I told myself I did. I married you because you were the only living thing that had reached me since my brother died, and I could not let you go back to the edge of some other man's ballroom. That is the truth. You asked for it, and there it is. And now let us go down, and let London see what an honest woman looks like." She could not speak. She put her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, and felt it going hard and quick under her palm. This man who had told her he was frozen. She found that her eyes had filled, and she blinked the tears back, because there was a ball to be gone to, and a battle to be fought. But she left her hand where it was a moment longer, and he covered it with his own. Neither of them said anything. The thing was said now, and did not need repeating. Then she lifted her chin and took his arm, and they went down together. The ball was everything Lady Sidonia had planned, and nothing that she had planned. The great rooms of High Hall blazed with light, and the county and half of London filled them, and every eye turned when the Duke and the new Duchess came down the stair, and a low hum of anticipation ran through the crowd. The anticipation of people who have come to see a fall. Lady Sidonia stood near the foot of the stairs, exquisite in silver, smiling her pleasant smile, ready. She made her move early, before the dancing, in the way she had planned it, in a knot of the most important guests, where the maximum number of the right people would hear. She greeted the Duchess with wide, warm, poisonous civility. In a voice pitched to carry, she said how brave it was of dear Eulalia to attempt so grand an entertainment, and how charming it was that the Duke had taken a wife with such refreshingly natural country manners. She did so hope, she said, that the evening would not prove too great a strain, since a house like High Hall could be so very demanding for one not born to it. Every word was a knife wrapped in silk. The circle waited, smiling, for the country duchess to redden, or to stammer, or to lash out and prove herself the vulgar creature the story promised. Eulalia did none of those things. She looked at Lady Sidonia with her level grey gaze, the gaze that saw what people were rather than what they wished to seem. She let a small silence fall. And then she said, without heat, in the clear, quiet voice she had used at her father's table, "You are very kind to concern yourself, Lady Sidonia. I know that you had hoped to be mistress of this house yourself, and I am sorry for your disappointment, truly. It is a hard thing to want something for years and see it go another way. I do not hold your feeling against you. But I think you should know that you cannot make me ashamed of who I am by naming it, because I have never been ashamed of it, and a person who is not ashamed cannot be shamed. I was born to a small house and a good father, and I learned to say true things and value them, and my husband married me for exactly that, and no whisper of yours will unmarry us, because whispers have no power over people who are not afraid of the truth. I am sorry you have spent your summer on this. It cannot have made you happy. I should have wished you happier. And the terrible thing, the thing that undid Lady Sidonia completely, was that there was no cruelty in it. If Eulalia had struck back with malice, Sidonia could have won, could have been the injured party, could have made the vulgar country duchess into the villain of the tale. But Eulalia had answered venom with something Sidonia had no defence against, which was honesty softened by an actual, unbearable, unlooked-for pity. She had named Sidonia's true wound out loud, gently, in front of everyone, and forgiven it, and wished her well. And there is no smiling reply to that. The circle, which had come to watch a countrywoman disgrace herself, found itself watching instead a great lady's cruelty met with a grace it could not touch, and the sympathy of the room, which is a tide that runs always toward dignity, turned in an instant and turned against Sidonia. She stood a moment with her pleasant smile fixed and dying on her face, and Eulalia saw, in the instant before Sidonia mastered herself and withdrew, the thing beneath the beauty, which was fear. Not fear of the Duchess. Fear of the future rushing at her, the years opening ahead in which she would not be the great match, would not be chosen, had spent her whole self on a position that had gone to a nobody, and had nothing now to spend it on again. It was a naked, human, frightened thing, and Eulalia, who might have exulted, found that she could not, and only felt sorry, which was worse for Sidonia than any triumph could have been. Lady Sidonia made her excuses within the hour, and left High Hall, and she did not trouble the Pendraiths again. She married the following year a viscount of no particular distinction, and lived a life of moderate consequence that was not the life she had wanted. That was the whole of her defeat, and it was, those few who understood it agreed, exactly enough. Philip had watched it all from a little distance, and when Sidonia had gone, he came to his wife's side, and he did a thing that finished the evening's work as thoroughly as her own words had begun it. He took her hand, in full view of the assembled county and half of London, and raised it to his lips. And he looked at her, while he did it in a way that no one in that room could mistake for the courtesy of a convenient marriage. The last of the whispers died that night, and were never seriously revived. The Duke of Pendraith, it was agreed by everyone who had seen it, was not a man who regretted his wife. They danced later, when the rooms had settled and the music had grown soft, and he held her a little closer than the dance required, and she let him. "You told her you were sorry for her," he said. "You meant it." "I did. I know what it is to want a thing and watch it go by. I wanted it less cruelly than she did, but I knew the feeling. It seemed unkind to pretend I did not." "You are," said the Duke of Pendraith, "the most extraordinary woman in England, and I have spent a year being too frozen and too foolish to say so, and I do not intend to waste any more time." He drew back enough to look at her. I know we made a bargain. I know we agreed not to ask this of each other. But I am asking it now, because we do not lie, and I will not go on pretending this is a marriage of convenience when it has not been one for months. I love you, Eulalia. Not conveniently, not safely, entirely. I have thawed straight through, and it is your doing, and I would rather feel all of it, the grief and the joy together, beside you, than feel nothing at all ever again. That is the truth. Now you may speak. She looked up at him, at the hard, handsome face, gone open and unguarded, at the amber eyes that had learned, in a year, to give something back. I stopped telling myself it could not be, weeks ago, she said. I only did not say so, because I was waiting for you. You are slow, Your Grace, for a clever man. And then, because they did not lie to each other, and because it was true, and because she had waited a long time to say a true thing to someone who wanted to hear it. I love you. I have loved you since you took the reproof at my father's table, and did not crush me for it. I did not know it then. I know it now. There. We are neither of us frozen any longer. And he laughed, which the county had not heard the Duke of Pendraith do, in living memory, and several people turned to look, and he did not care, and they finished the dance. There was a grief that did not lift, and neither of them ever pretended it did. Edmund was still dead, and no happiness of Philip's could reach back and mend the letter he had never written, or the coldness he had let stand. He carried that, quietly, to the end of his days, as a man carries an old wound that has healed but aches in certain weathers. But he carried it now, as a living man carries such things, and not as a frozen one. Eulalia knew the whole of it, and never once asked him to feel less than he felt. That was the gift she gave him that no one else could have, the same gift she had given him in her aunt's grey garden. It was to stand with him in the hard thing, and not fill the silence. His mother, the dowager, lived long enough to see it, and to hold the first of her grandchildren before she died. He was a small, dark-haired boy, with his father's amber eyes. And already, everyone said, though he was far too young for anyone truly to know it, he had the promise of his mother's habit of looking at people as though he could see what they truly were. They called him Edmund. It was Eulalia's idea. Philip could not have proposed it, but when she did, he had to leave the room for a while, and when he came back his eyes were wet, and he only took her hand and pressed it. And that was all, and it was enough. Years later, when they were no longer young, the Duke and Duchess of Pendraith would sometimes dine alone at the great table at High Hall. At the near end of it, close enough to talk, the two places always laid together where 200 years of Pendraiths had sat marooned at opposite poles of the mahogany. And now and then, on such an evening, Philip would look down the long, empty stretch of the table toward where a guest would sit. He would remember a raw autumn night in a modest house 2 counties south, and a woman in a made-over gown who had not known who he was. She had told him, across a table of disguised mutton, that boredom was not a misfortune that happened to him, but a discourtesy he was doing to others. And that no one, she suspected, had ever told him the difference. Someone had told him that night. It had cost her everything she had to spend, and she had spent it on a stranger who could do nothing for her, because it was true and needed saying. He had crossed his whole cold life to reach her after that, and he had never once been sorry. For a house, he had learned, and a life, and a heart, are none of them saved by the people who tell you what you wish to hear. They are saved, if they are saved at all, by the one person with the courage to tell you the truth at the table, when the truth is the last thing in the world you want and the first thing you need. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.